Drone inspection shown to be 6 to 10 times faster than traditional inspection methods? Sounds like an industry standard to me. Welcome to the FLIR Delta podcast, where we bring in leaders within the drone community and discuss their insights, perspectives, and unique journeys through the unmanned industry. I'm your host, Randall Warnas. In this episode, I sit down with Nikhil Vadhavkar, CEO of Raptor Maps. In my mind, Nikhil is the industry expert on everything solar. We discuss the rapid growth of solar energy consumption and how drones are maximizing ROI. We're going to talk a lot about drone stuff, but before we get into that, tell me about Nikhil outside of drones.
Nikhil outside of drones. Well, I'm an engineer and an entrepreneur. So, I grew up in the Midwest, and I think that it's really interesting because as Nikhil within drones has evolved, our company, we spent a lot of time out in Silicon Valley, doing Y Combinator. We've also spent a lot of time in Boston. As a lot of you may know, we were founded, out of MIT. And so the Midwest, obviously being, halfway between those two areas, I really feel like I combine a lot of the, the sensibilities of being like, an engineer on the East Coast at a really good institution with, a lot of the vision that you see kind of out in a place like California. So I think I embody that quite a bit. Outside of that, I really like to travel. One of my favorite things to do is to put on a hard hat and go to some site and visit a client and really in some different state and just dig into what the heck are you guys doing out here? How can we make your lives easier? So, I always like to travel, and now that I have this company and now that we're working with people across lots of different sectors, I think that's really strengthened it.
So what compelled you to start Raptor Maps, and when was that founded? What the early stages of Raptor Maps look like?
Yeah, so I've always been into optimization, looking at the world around you, how can we make things better, whether that's using resources that are maybe underutilized or just making things more efficient. And so with Raptor Maps, I was at MIT, and I was in a public health class, and we learned about the problem of delivering medical supplies in developing nations. And so I applied for a Gates Foundation grant, which we got, and that really enabled me to both lead a team and learn all about building drones, from soup to nuts, starting with back then your Ardu pilots and your KK boards and things like that,
right.
But also going over to Africa to actually debut this technology. We were traveling over these roads that were impassable, had ruts in them, and then we were also thinking of the problem of, okay, if you have cold supplies or time-sensitive supplies, are you better off driving over a road where you can carry a lot of it, or are you better off flying a drone where you can carry a little bit? And so it was this really big optimization problem, and I saw that drones could have a huge impact in alleviating some of this stuff that's over-constrained. So I thought that was really cool. Then when I was at MIT in the aerospace department, or AeroAstro as we call it, I met my co-founder, Eddie, and he's a software guy. So aerospace engineer, but very, very good at software. And so, he started talking about, how with all of these drones, we're going to get a ton of data, and, for some people that's going to be a really big problem. But for people who kind of saw the opportunity, it would actually be, very useful to be able to collect these data sets and actually do some, have a critical mass of data to do something with it. And so with Raptor Maps, the goal was to, and still is, to basically find a problem, make sure you're solving the right problem, and then work backwards and say, okay, what data do I need to collect, and what systems do I need, and what processes do I put in place, and all of that. And so that's kind of how Raptor Maps was born.
But I guess you at some point had to decide whether you go into the workforce and join a company with your skill set, or to start your own thing.
Right.
Early days, you and Eddie in a garage, in a room,
laboratory, dorm room, yeah,
wherever.
It was wherever.
You started it while in MIT.
Fields, yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, and in early days, we were actually, we were looking around and saying, okay, this was back in the Section 333 days, which for those of you who aren't familiar, that was you had to have a real pilot's license. So every time we wanted to fly for a customer commercially, we had to contract with someone. We had the exemption, but we had to contract with, people with pilot's licenses. And so back then we really saw that, agriculture was going to be a really good market to go into. The challenge from the data side, though, was that no matter how good the drone data layers were, the ground truth data layers that we were comparing them to were lacking. And so, so we had to make a really, really tough choice, which is, do we focus all of our efforts on collecting that data layer, which can take many years and is, can be a really tricky thing to do, or do we use a lot of this software infrastructure we built to go from, farming food to farming light and solar farms? And so, we realized that was a really logical fit for what we had already built.
So Raptor Maps as a company today, are you a service provider? Are you a true software company? What do you call yourselves? And then now, do you just focus only on solar, or do you do other things as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, our mission at Raptor Maps is to build software to improve and protect the world's infrastructure. So we are a software company through and through. That being said, as companies get started and start building their programs, not all of them are the same. Some, really want to fly drones in-house, and, we can work with them on optimizing, okay, how do you collect that data? How do you spend the least amount of time in the field? How does that data flow get analyzed, tie into your back-end systems? There are other companies that may want to build these programs but want to dip their toe in the water, and so with that, we've built out really strong partner networks for everything from supplying them with the hardware to really great service providers that can actually go out and collect that data and be very professional and safe about it. So at Raptor Maps, even though software is what we do, we make sure that when we go to work with a client and say, yes, we can address these challenges you have, we're addressing everything that they need, not just the software piece of the puzzle.
Got you. And so what value are you seeing being driven from drone technology in the solar space? What actual takeaways are you finding?
Yeah, so, I think most directly you're seeing how drones are replacing this manual electrical testing. So it's something that's done, it's required, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. It's so manually intensive that, like, how you would paint it, and by the time you get to one end, the other end's already peeling, and you got to do it all over again, right? Yeah. So similar thing here, where a lot of these big solar farms, it's so labor intensive, you can only do like 20% of it every single year, and so you cover the entire thing in like 5 years, and you go back, and you're not necessarily picking up on everything, and drones have completely turned that on its head, where now you can look at a utility scale solar farm. When we say utility scale, we mean hundreds to thousands of football fields, right, in a single day. And you can assess not only what's going on electrically, but you can even look at, is there vegetation that's covering these solar panels? Are there, issues with, how the tilt trackers are they malfunctioning? Things like that. So, and a lot of people say, oh, okay, well, so are you eliminating labor? And the real answer is no, because solar is growing so quickly that we're allowing our customers to literally, plug all the holes that they have as they continue to grow and grow, because, they have this workforce that's stretched so thin that, they don't have the people to bring on to be able to maintain them unless they find these efficiencies. So that's kind of, that's the first step, is, just addressing that. The second thing we're doing with drones is increasing the production and the availability. And so, it's not just meeting your obligations to find issues and find major issues, but it's actually looking at the site as a whole, being able to look at all the different variables and figure out, okay, if I order this part and send someone here at the right time, I can restore this much production that's worth this much money to me. So we're improving them across the board. And then, we're also, if you look at these assets, we're also de-risking them, right? So at the end of the day, solar farms are really dynamic. It's not just, I've got this static thing, out in the desert that's collecting light. It's, you've got banks that are paid for them. You have owners that own them and are getting that revenue. You have the operations and maintenance people that have to actually maintain them, and they're accountable, and they, drones are benefiting all of these people, the people that insure them, for example. So it's not just one stakeholder that's benefiting, it's all of them.
Right. So, and you use thermal imaging in doing drone inspections.
Critical.
Yeah, so explain that. I mean, we talked about the color of your jacket changing from green to orange, and the orange had a thermal element to it.
Absolutely.
And to me, obviously that's validating for the technology we put out. And solar is so visually compelling because if you look at a solar panel, you don't know if it's functioning or not unless you see the heat that's being absorbed or being reflected.
Right.
So talk about a little bit about how thermal is impacting the way that we're doing solar inspections today from drones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thermal is required for solar, and the reason for that is because you can literally use a thermal camera to see where money is being lost. It's incredible. So you could look at it with the naked eye. You may not see anything. You look at it under thermal, and all of a sudden you can tell, hey, a third of this. A third of this module is offline. There must be a diode. Either a diode is activated or there's some issue going on here. Or an entire string, which is the amount of power a house would use, right? Like that's completely offline. And thermal, it's really interesting because there's thermal on the aerial side, right? So there's I've got my drone and it's flying over and it's capturing all these things that might be going wrong. But it's also widely used already by technicians just on the ground to diagnose electrical issues. So, the more, if you've got a short circuit, you've got a lot of current running through somewhere, that's heating up. You can see that with thermal. And so this technology is already being used on the ground. So putting it in the air is a really comfortable step for solar. And all of a sudden it's gone from, one person with a handheld thermal camera to, the view of the entire asset. So
when you talk about solar, I have an immense amount of respect for how you talk about solar. Not only because you're passionate about something that, otherwise people might not find a lot of passion in, and you're just really eloquent with how you speak about it. How did you learn to be a solar expert?
Yeah, I think this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? You gotta. It's funny because we're here at, filming this at Interdrone, right? And so, but I realized when I was on the plane, I was like, oh, what's peeking out of my shoulder bag? It was one of our green vests that we, go on site with. And I love having that because, between that and a hard hat and your jeans, like you can and should, even in, everyone from the sea level down should be out there getting their hands dirty in the field, And it's amazing because, a lot of times people feel like, oh, we're coming from the drone space, the technology space, and the knowledge transfers down from us to the customer. But if you just sit back and listen and you talk to the technicians and say, okay, what does your day-to-day look like? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What kind of equipment do you have? If you find something, what do you actually do about it? And you'll be amazed how much they'll tell you, and problems that you don't even realize they had. They'll come and talk to you about, and things you thought were problems because they, it looks cool or is visually appealing or whatever, may not be that big of a deal to them. And so that's how you learn both about the space, but as well as, what do you actually do to make an impact in that space.
So for someone that is doing a drone inspection of a solar array or a solar space for the first time, what kind of best practices would you share with them? And, considering that most of the people that might take this advice would be able to fly the drone and understand that concept, what are just some takeaways that you've had while doing solar inspections?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say is breathe, because it is very, people tend to, their heart rate goes up a little bit when they think, okay, now I've got this really expensive, thermal camera on my drone, compared to the cost of a drone. And the real answer, though, is it's another imaging system. The drone's not going to fly, left instead of right just because you put this different payload on it, right? And so that's the first thing I do is relax. We put out a lot of pointers on, our goal is to, make this as accessible as possible. As a software company, we obviously have a vested interest in making sure everyone's taking really good, really consistent data. We want you guys to be successful, and so we'll do things like when we put out that checklist with you guys, like
right.
when you're out on a solar farm, make sure make sure your data is radiometric. Here's how you check for it. Here's how you fly, with the panels. Here's how you minimize glare. Here's how much you can change the gimbal angle. And I'd say it's incredible what just half a day of practice on a real solar farm will get you. It doesn't have to be big. A lot of people feel, well, I only want to do utility scale solar farms, so I need to go out and find 100 and 200 megawatt site? And the real answer is no. Go find a 1 megawatt site that's within an hour of you, and make friends with that asset owner, and use that as your practice, or find a commercial rooftop. Right, a lot of the concepts transfer over just fine, and you'll probably make a new friend and probably a new customer while you do it.
So, what would take, I guess, thermal imaging inspections for solar, or just solar inspections in general from UAVs to the next level? What kind of either industry changes or hardware changes or regulation changes would allow it to be even better?
Well, you hit on a lot of good ones right there.
Good.
But I think, at Raptor Maps, I think one of the things for us is, it's no secret we're working on real-time analytics, right? We got a big press release about it. It's basically taking what we already do today in the cloud and porting it over to the drone and interacting with the SDKs. And I think the reason that's so important is because, we're helping with, data consistency, making sure that, technicians are out in the field taking that data in a really, consistent manner. But the second thing is, very practically reducing, truck rolls and windshield time and all that. So I think, if you're looking at, where is it going, it's absolutely, going in that direction. What can they already address while they're out there and have documented that they addressed it? Because if you fix something, you want to get credit for it, right? You want someone to know, like, there was a problem here and I fixed it. So then the other thing, the other things we're seeing are, of course, beyond visual line of sight. In the case of solar, a lot of these are kind of in pretty remote locations, fairly, as long as you're following all the laws and everything, it's very low risk. So I see these as being some of the first sites to, be beyond visual line of sight, and leading into the drone in a box concept. So as that future happens, we're making sure we're ready for it. I think the other thing, though, is that, we live in this, coming from this space, and we're at InterDrone and all of that, is, we live in this drone bubble, and which was great, because for the first few years, right, it's, anything you see from a drone, it's like, wow, that's really cool. That's a new perspective. Look at all the stuff I can do with it. But I think as these industries mature, and not just solar, we're realizing that data interoperability is incredibly important. And that's not just to keep it consistent between, providers and technologies and things like that, but it's also really important because you want your drone data to talk to all this other asset data. So when you're talking solar, for instance, weather is really important. Financial data is really important. The history of the asset. How is that asset constructed? There's a lot of logic that we build into our data models. This module, this solar panel, it's wired up in a certain way. It's in a certain location. And so, I think one of the big things that people are going to realize is, drone data does not exist in a vacuum, and the easier we can make it to pull in other data sources, the more powerful everything can be.
So when did you start Raptor Maps? What year?
2015.
And you were still at grad school in MIT, right?
Yeah, so we actually, it's kind of a funny story. So Eddie and I, when we left MIT, we didn't know that we were accepted to Y Combinator. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Y Combinator is, this premier accelerator in Silicon Valley. So this is where, Airbnb went through, Stripe, the big payments company. They're very focused on, big markets, technology, high growth. And it's really nice because, it forces you to have that discipline, but it also, gets you in front of a lot of investors by the end of it. And so when we left MIT, we didn't have that. We didn't know that we had that. I don't want to call it a safety net, but we didn't know that we were part of that. We just knew that, this is something we were passionate about, and we're going to make it happen no matter what. Then we ended up doing that and kind of moving forward from there.
So as far as being a CEO of a company, you have great technology, you're getting a lot of recognition for it. What do you consider your proudest moment thus far in the drone space? Like a moment where you're like, wow, that was awesome, or I'm going to go home and pop a bottle of champagne. What have you celebrated, and what's the crowning moment thus far?
Yeah, I think, for me, when you start a company and you're really working with customers, you're validating a market, you don't build everything you need to build and then go and put it in front of a client. It's an iterative process. But eventually, as a software company, at some point, we start to lock in certain things, and we want to say, yes, this should be fully automated. And I think the proudest moment I had, recently was, when we had this really nice, really pretty complex report that we had done for a client, and we were able to point back to the data model and the code that built that and say every single piece of data in this report was, came from, this API endpoint. It was fully auto-generated, which was exciting because what that means is not only can I produce this thing that the client wants, but it means I can give them, this entire data model, and they can do all kinds of things with it, be way beyond what I'm giving them right here in this report. Mm-hmm. And so that was really exciting just when we realized that our back end was good enough to start seeing all these emergent properties and different types of analyses that we could do and really powerful tools that we could give to our clients. So I think that was great. I think the other really big one was, as far as I know, we're one of probably the only company in solar to actually show, machine learning. So when we were at Intersolar, we showed that video. It's, this is, here are the boxes, and here's what the computer sees in real time, and here's where it made a mistake, but it corrected itself because we were averaging it out over time. Things like that. So really, being able to show people what we do and how we do it is really important, and I love doing that for clients. Like, to a certain extent, maybe it doesn't really matter how we get the result, but they like being part of that process. They like looking under the hood and seeing what's going on. So sure. I really enjoy showing that to them.
So it's interesting that you bring up, AI and machine vision, and I guess, is that something that matters to you? Is that something that you would say you want the drone industry to focus on, is getting to the next step of having that deep learning concept within the drone space? Or are there other things that matter to you deeply to your core where you're willing to put in all your energy for the advancement of this technology?
Yeah, well, I think what we are really focused on is making sure that we're solving, scalable enterprise problems. And so one of the things I like about solar, and we're very focused on solar today. Our approach, we see ourselves as doing this for infrastructure, not just solar. So we've trained completely automated systems for things like corrosion detection on tanks, or even for food processors optimizing on chemical processes, things like that. But the cool thing about solar is that it's not one of these one-off there was a weather event so we need to do it, or our technicians are having a hard time accessing a site so we need to do it. It's something that the entire industry is doing consistently across the board. And that makes it really good for AI and machine learning because people are adopting it across the board. That means there's a lot of data, a consistent amount of data, a way that you want to analyze this and compare this analysis to one that happened, half a year ago or 3 months ago or whatever. And so I think AI is almost like a metric that shows if I can apply AI to this, it means enough people are doing this in an industry that we should care about it. Mm-hmm. So that's what gets me really excited. And so, I really like a lot of these, use cases and pilots and things like that, but I always take it a step further and say, okay, will everyone in the industry be doing this? Should everyone in the industry be doing this? And if the answer is yes, then of course AI and machine learning are going to come into it, because it comes down to optimizing people's time, optimizing, systems, and making everything more efficient.
Sure. So I have 5 questions. They're
sure.
Fast response questions.
Okay.
Okay, just shoot the answer from your hip, okay?
Okay.
Cool. First one. To power the whole world with solar, they'd have to cover 191,000 square miles with solar panels, okay? We're at about 2% of that right now. Mm-hmm. True or false? In your lifetime, we'll surpass 20%.
True.
Okay. Fact or fiction? Amazon will be delivering packages with drones by 2023, 5 years from now.
Well, 2 is packages, so yes. Can't be wrong there.
Okay. List the following in order of importance to you. Airframe, payload, software, training.
Software.
Okay.
Training, payload, airframe.
Okay. Beyond visual line of sight waivers should be easier to get. True or false?
True.
Okay. What's your go-to on Spotify?
Go-to on Spotify. Oh, man.
You're going to bump something right now as you're walking back to your hotel room. What would it be?
I really like the band Metric.
Metric.
Check them out.
Kind of stuff
from Canada, synth pop.
Synth pop.
Yeah, I was going to try to catch them on tour, but they're going from Toronto right to Europe next week. So
cool.
Next time.
All right. So what's the next big thing for the industry?
Drones in general, or solar?
Yeah, for the drone industry. Like, what's the next big unlocking moment, like Part 107 was, because it enabled a whole new network of pilots, probably the launch of, I would say, the Phantom 1, but maybe even Phantom 2, and some of that technology. I think there's been these kind of like moments in the drone world. So what's the next big one?
I think, well, I'm biased, but I think the next big one is going to be, software. I think everyone, we've got the airframes and the payloads. Like we're starting to dial that in really well. We're starting to dial in, the regulation. People know that that's a thing that's coming, right, beyond visual line of sight and all that. And then on the complete, other end, you've got, the AI, the Watson, the, TensorFlow, all this stuff. But somewhere in the middle needs to be a digital representation of the asset. And I think now people are starting to realize, like, hey, we should be focusing on this because this is going to allow us to connect this awesome, hardware that we've built with these really awesome, cloud-based or, even on the edge-based tools, and we'll be able to do something really useful with it. So I think we're going to see some really fundamental software, and that's going to be driven by enterprises. Because up until now, enterprises, yeah, you have some companies that do have, 50, 100 drone pilots, and they're starting to see some of these pain points earlier, but other companies are now starting to transition from, hey, I've got my UAS manager with a few pilots to, man, I'm trying to roll this out, and I need software that's going to handle all of that. It's going to make it all consistent, make the analysis good, tie it into, my control center, combine it with all this other data. So we're going to start to see all that infrastructure getting built out.
Yeah, so I think collaboration is a big part of that. And huge. I think that, companies can try to keep it to themselves and try to, build their empire based off of having the right software. But you had talked about how Raptor Maps is quite open to collaboration with others, and you have an API that you basically share. They put it into their stack, and they're able to get, better data. So do you want to explain some of that, like some of how you want to build partnerships with others and what kind of partners would be right for Raptor Maps?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at Raptor Maps, we just want the customers, the end users, to really get a lot of benefit. So, if you're already working with an end customer and, solar or some of the things we're doing is just part of that stack, because everyone can't do everything, right? We want to make it really easy to pull in that analysis and be able to, so let's say you've got, a really nice display that you've built out for a customer that you want to be able to pull that data into. I think it's really important to give you access to that. At the end of the day, we want to make good, consistent data models that we apply AI to that are going to help the entire industry, standardize it across the entire industry. And, we're happy to power, a lot of the good companies out there that are, focused on a lot of different things, both within energy and across multiple verticals within the drone field.
Cool. And the last question I have for you is just, if you think about yourself as a young CEO of a company in a really exciting industry, doing really fundamentally exciting stuff, what's advice you would give to someone that's looking to start up a new company? They don't really, they don't know what they're getting themselves into, but what are some of the, steps that you took that you either found really valuable or missteps that you'd suggest to avoid?
Yeah, I think, if I were starting a company, I think, you want to have a big vision, but you want to execute very narrowly. So what I mean by that is, it's no secret, right? Our vision is, we're making these data models for different asset classes and making it so that, we update the digital state of them and make that information very accessible. But we're focused, right? So we found a really good use case, and we're making sure that we work with those customers and really understand what they need and build them the tools they need. So I think, there's a lot of this, there's a lot of this drive for, hyper growth, which is good as long as you know what metric you're trying to grow on. So I think take a couple breaths, figure that one out, and then you're going to know exactly what pressure point to apply.
So what's interesting to me is that the drone industry, some people feel like it's going to leave them behind. Like, we have to strike now because there's this ramp up. And I mean, we're not even there yet. We're tip of the iceberg still.
Yeah.
And I think that when you say take a breath, it's interesting because if you want to hit the market with something truly valuable, you have to move at the speed of the drone industry, which is breakneck fast.
Right.
But you also need to put something out that's valuable. If you just put out, your first beta as a product, it's scary, and that's your one shot to hit the market and have people take you seriously. So I guess one follow-up question is, what was Raptor Maps' first product, the first thing that you showed, and how did you gauge that timing of when to go to market with it?
Well, one of our first products was it was a machine learning algorithm that ran on board a drone to detect a very specific type of potato virus.
There it is.
So yeah, we knew it was ready to go when it hit the right time of the growing season, and we had to deploy it. So yeah.
Well, and that really just tells the story that in the drone industry, or maybe any industry in life in general, saying yes to new opportunities and finding yourself being flexible and pivoting to things that you maybe didn't expect. Mm-hmm. You go from potato viruses to solar and find your way,
Right.
And so I guess that's one thing that seems like a common thread in anything with business is be ready to change, because your initial plan is probably not going to be what ends up getting you investors and things like that.
Right. And I will say it's interesting because it is a matter, you brought up kind of this timing, and I think that's a good point where, today, it doesn't make sense for that to be our focus. But that's not to say that, new technology isn't coming online that's closer to the ground there that's going to enable us to have that data layer that we do need. And all of a sudden, then, yeah, we've got the experience, we've got the software, and, it's a market we can grow into. But, yeah, I think, timing's everything.
For sure, man. Well, I mean, consider you a friend for life in the drone industry and out. And, it's been a pleasure to sit down with you, chat about drones, and hope to do it again.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah,
this was great.
That's that.
Thanks for listening. Make sure to head to FLIR.com/Delta for more episodes and downloads. Also, subscribe or follow to make sure to catch all the FLIR Delta content. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, someone you'd like us to sit down with, or a way we can make this podcast even better, make sure to send us your thoughts to delta.podcast@FLIR.com. Again, thanks for making FLIR Delta part of your connection with the drone industry.